The cargo ship Evermist had been at sea for nearly 3 weeks before things started to go wrong. It wasn't the kind of vessel people paid attention to just another freighter carrying sealed containers and skimming quietly across the Atlantic. The crew was used to long stretches of nothingness, of watching the horizon blur into gray water and gray sky. But this trip felt different from the start. The air was heavier. The silence between waves stretched longer. Something unseen clung to the ship like rust. On the 17th night, without warning, the engines cut off. No warning lights, no smoke, no signs of mechanical failure. The ship simply died. The radio crackled with static, then went silent. There was no signal, no GPS, and no response from any nearby vessels or coastal stations. The crew scrambled to restart the systems, but nothing responded. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, swallowed by a fog so dense it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. The sea around them vanished beneath the haze, and even the deck was hard to make out beyond a few meters. The usual sounds of the ocean waves slapping the hull, seagulls screeching overhead disappeared completely. All that remained was the low groan of metal and the creaking of the ship's bones, as if it too had become aware of something watching it. The fog didn't lift with the sunrise. It stayed, draping the ship in a permanent twilight. The crew stopped going out alone. Some refused to leave their bunks. Others wandered the corridors with flashlights, claiming they heard footsteps echoing above or below deck footsteps that never seemed to match their own. One man reported seeing shadows moving between the containers, even though no one else had been near them. Another claimed the ship wasn't drifting, but being pulled, slowly and deliberately, by something unseen in the water despite their fear. The crew tried to maintain routine. Meals were served, equipment was checked, logs were kept. But unease had sunk its claws into every corner of the vessel. The longer they remained trapped in the fog, the more the Evermist seemed to shift. Corridors felt longer. Doors creaked. Open on their own? Reflections in portholes didn't always match what should be their dot. It started with one crew member simply not showing up for the morning shift. His bunk was untouched, his uniform still hanging in the locker, but he was gone. At first, they thought he might have slipped and fallen overboard during the night, that no alarms had sounded and the waters were too calm for such an accident. They searched the entire ship top to bottom, engine room to cargo hold, but found nothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a complete absence dot by the next morning, another was gone. This time, the crew was alert, paranoid even. Guards were posted in pairs, doors were locked, and night watches became routine. But none of it helped. Every night, someone vanished without a sound. No one heard screams. No one saw anything. One moment, they were there. The next, they were part of the fog. Panic settled into the crew like a sickness. Some refused to sleep. Others wouldn't leave the control room. One sailor sat in a corner, whispering prayers in a language no one else understood. The more they tried to track what was happening, the more impossible it became. There was no pattern, no logical explanation. The disappearances defied reason, like the ship existed in a pocket of space where the rules of time and matter broke down. Surveillance. Cameras were set up in the hallways, but the footage always glitched at the worst moments, just static and distorted sounds. Once, the camera caught a frame where a blurry shape stood at the end of the corridor. Motionless, featureless, almost human, but wrong in proportion. It was gone in the next frame. That image circulated among the crew like a curse, each man interpreting it differently, but all agreeing on one thing. They were not alone on the ship. The presence was never seen directly, but everyone felt it. It lingered just beyond the corners of vision, always a step behind, always watching. At first, it was dismissed as paranoia brought on by stress and isolation. But soon, even the most rational among them admitted that something was wrong. Mirrors became traps. Reflections would hold on a moment too long, showing shapes that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Windows revealed movement on the deck when the cameras showed nothing there. Shadows flickered across walls, defying light sources. And at times, the ship's very air felt charged with a strange, static hum. Some described a cold breath on the back of their necks. Others said they heard someone whisper their names in the dark. One man locked himself in the supply closet, claiming something had followed him down the corridor, never revealing itself but matching his every step. When the door was forced open, he was shaking, eyes wide, lips pale, unable to speak for hours. They stopped patrolling alone. Every walk down a hallway became a desperate rush, backs pressed to walls, flashlights trembling in their grip. But no matter how fast they moved, the feeling never left. It was like something lived inside the steel hull, something ancient, something that fed off fear. Even in silence, it felt loud, like the walls were breathing, like eyes were embedded. In the very metal of the ship, every corner turned felt like a trap. Every hallway held its own tension. The entity didn't attack. It didn't need to. Its strength was in presence and the way it slowly eroded reason, trust, and hope. It didn't stalk with footsteps. It flowed, crept, clung to the air, invisible, but deeply felt. No one saw it. Everyone felt it. Sleep became dangerous. The crew learned that quickly. Every night someone would vanish, and every day the fear deepened. They began keeping track of time, rotating sleep shifts in pairs, yet even that proved useless. Paranoia bloomed like mold in every corner of the ship. Conversations were whispered, accusations surfaced. Some believed one of them was behind the disappearances. Others believed no one was left, just husks being mimicked by something else. The isolation twisted their minds. The fog never lifted, not even slightly. It pressed against every window like a living wall, muting the outside world and smothering all sense of direction. There was no way to know how long they'd been drifting. Watches stopped keeping proper time. Clocks ran backward or refused to move at all. Even their internal sense of day and night began to fray. Food supplies were untouched, but no one had an appetite. The mess hall remained mostly empty. No one wanted to be alone in large, echoing rooms. The ship creaked more now, louder than before. Metallic groans stretched into the long hours of the night, echoing like moans. Some said they heard footsteps running above them. Others claimed to hear sobbing behind closed bulkheads. But no matter how many times they opened doors or checked compartments, they found nothing. The few who remained started to lose track of who had disappeared and who was still there. Faces blurred, voices changed. They would speak to someone only to realize a moment later that the person had been missing for days. Fear bred hallucinations. Or maybe they weren't hallucinations at all. Some crew members tried to send messages and bottles overboard, but the sea below was wrong, completely still, black, and endless. As if the ship was floating above an abyss instead of water. The ship had changed. It wasn't just the silence, or the fog, or the disappearances. It was the feeling that the Evermist itself had shifted into something else, something sentient. The longer the crew stayed aboard, the more it felt like they weren't drifting aimlessly at sea, but being held in place, anchored by some unseen force. The ship groaned and breathed like a living thing. Doors opened without wind. Lights flickered in patterns that didn't follow any electrical fault. Every part of the vessel, from the engine room to the cargo hold, felt like it was watching them. They stopped referring to it as a machine. Even the captain, who had sailed for 30 years, no longer trusted the metal beneath his feet. Maps no longer mattered. Compasses spun wildly. GPS devices blinked with symbols instead of coordinates. It was as though the ship had slipped out of reality, or perhaps been pulled into something deeper, something older than the ocean itself. Those who tried to escape, even by raft, were never seen again. No splashes, no screams. Just the thick silence of the fog swallowing them whole. It was as if the sea rejected their attempts to leave, or the ship refused to let them go. The few remaining began whispering theories, half-lucid ramblings about cursed vessels and ghost seas. Some believed they'd sailed into a place that wasn't meant for the living. Others were convinced the ship had always belonged to something else, something that had simply waited long enough to reveal itself. There were places on the Evermist they avoided entirely now. The lower decks, the maintenance tunnels, the walkways behind the engine room. Not because of what they had seen, but because of what they felt when they got close, as though the still vibrated with a pulse that wasn't mechanical,